Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. All right. It is 6:30, so I'm going to call to order the budget hearing and annual meeting for 2022 of the Oregon School District. This is the annual meeting of the Oregon School District pursuant to Wisconsin Statute section 120.08. This meeting is prescribed by state law, and electors are invited to attend. As electors, we have special powers reserved to us as a body, and these powers are outlined in state statute. This meeting will be conducted according to the rules of parliamentary procedure. We have an agenda for the meeting, and I have proof of notice, so we know that this has been publicly noticed. And there are guidelines for the meeting that will be our guide. There are sample motions, which is the blue sheet, which is at the door if you need that. Before proceeding to item 2 on the agenda, I would like to introduce the members of the Oregon School Board that are in attendance. So our Vice President, Tim LeBrun, our Treasurer, Troy Pankratz, our Clerk, Anna Bijak, and then Heather Garrison and Mary Lakuta. Great. Now we will begin with the budget hearing pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute, Section 65.90. You have copies of the preliminary budget in the packet. And now I'm going to turn it over to Andy Weiland to present the preliminary budget approved by the board on September 12th, 2022. The floor is yours, Andy.
Thank you. So I'm going to go over this fairly quickly, but at a high level, and I need to find the clicker. That's the only thing I don't have. There it is. All right. So, good point. Hey, look at that. All right. So the first thing is the books have been audited already by the accounting firm. They have done some of the certifications that go to the Department of Public Instruction, but we don't have our audit back. There are some federal things that they have to do that will hopefully have all that completed into the board, usually by December. So the first thing I always like to do as part of the financial report every year is talk a little bit about what happened last year, because that's the kind of the footing for where we go for the future. So let's recap that quick. So first thing that we always like to do is talk about a couple funds that are together. It's actually 3 funds. Fund 1027. Fund 10 is our main operating fund, works for the majority of the expenses that goes through the district. Fund 27 is related to special education. Those two are linked because of a transfer that we make between those 2 funds, because special education doesn't stand by itself, unfortunately. We aren't given enough funding in order for it to do that. And then the third fund is Fund 38, typically. I'll include that in a slide here in a second. So our original budget last year was $57,200,000 for those 2 funds. Our actual expenses were a little bit more than that. I'm sorry, this is on the revenue side. We received a number of one-time revenues after the budget was actually approved that we hadn't anticipated. Some of that was related to the governor's money that he had given us. Some of it was related to federal funding that we were given, related to both kind of a holiday related to COVID leave through payroll tax relief, as well as it went through the state. It was actually unemployment compensation. It was funding that was provided by the federal government. On the expenditure side, we underspent the budget. The original budget was 61.1. Now that includes carryovers, and I'm going to be talking about carryover budget a little bit throughout this. Carryover budget is basically unexpended funds from the prior year that had a specific strategic purpose for how that money was supposed to be used. So we underspent that budget by about $2.8 million. I'll go to the next slide though, and kind of show you how this lines up. The budget revenues last year though were $57 million, and the expenditures were the $61 million. So there was a difference there, and that difference was intentional. It was assigned fund balance related. Those were things that we intentionally did. A good portion of that, $2.5 million last year, was related to money that we put aside related to basically COVID expenses, that money we had saved over the prior 2 years. On the actual expenses, you'll see that although we anticipated to have our fund balance go down by $3.8 million, it only went down by about $400,000. That was related to some of those revenues that we didn't anticipate, as well as some increases in some carryover line items that we had. So let's talk about this assigned fund balance. And sorry, they didn't line up. I thought we had them lined up there a little bit earlier today. But building carryover, that's actually been going down a little bit. So that's our 7 school buildings and money that they didn't expend from a prior year, $337,000. There is a varying amount by building. One building only had $2,000 left. One building had quite a bit more than that, obviously, to get that $337,000. Departmental carryover, that's been increasing over the last couple of years. There are some interesting things that are happening with that. We have some projects related to, did I just go, you still hear me? Okay. We have some projects that are related to vocational education licensing that have been increasing over the years. Basically, if we, the state has been encouraging the school district to dual certification for classes, and so in these vocational areas. And when that happens, the money's supposed to be spent to improve those programs. We track that, but those programs haven't been spending money. We've been getting the dual certification, but those projects that that money would fund hasn't been happening yet. Some of it's related to, for instance, I think there's almost $100,000 related to childcare licensing that we've been able to secure, and so they're saving up for a larger project. Director of Instruction, we weren't able to do a lot of professional development this last couple of years because of the pandemic, so that money has been increasing, but they've also had some strategic planning related to some curriculum adoption things that are happening in the near future. The Oregon Educational Association compensation system, that's from 2016 when we implemented a system for our teachers. We didn't spend all that money. That money is strategically, again, aligned with some components to that system that are still kind of playing out over time. We also had some additional grant funding that was underspent, and then some initiatives that the Board of Education specifically wanted to fund related to providing social workers for our school district for this year, as well as the Shell project, which we just completed this last summer, and then connected to that was a lighting project for a total of $2.4 million that was left over from last year. I'm going to move on to Fund 39 real quick. That was where we left off this last year. We did have enough money associated with making our bond payments. In fact, we still have $1.5 million. We are looking to continue to kind of work within that amount of money, the $1.5 million, to kind of spread out our debt service over time and save some interest costs. Our non-referendum debt fund also had a little bit of equity left over last year. This will be, we had to have some money in there to make a payment on September 1st. We had a little bit excess money in there. That was basically associated with interest revenue over the last 20 years. The nice thing about this particular fund is it will have a zero balance in it after this year. We're going to be making our last payment for our non-referendum debt up in March, I believe. So next year we will not have to have a payment related to non-referendum debt unless we issue more debt. Our capital projects fund, this is the fund where bond proceeds from Building Forest Edge went. We still have some money left over in that fund as of July 1st. We do have a couple outstanding projects that we're working on related to the front of the building, as well as the playground area. There very well may be some funding left over on this budget at the end of the year. If there is, we would move that to our debt service fund to help with debt, just like I talked about just a moment ago. So that's outstanding. The other thing that money could be used for, and we are evaluating and spending a little bit on it, is some safety improvements in our school district. If you remember, the 2018 referendum actually allowed us to do that. Our food service fund was really a highlight last year for us. We got some additional one-time funding that the federal government provided us, as well as you may recall that this last year the food service program was able to offer free lunches to our students through a federal program. So our parents did not have to pay last year unless they bought a la carte items and that type of thing. So we went from June 1st of 2020, I believe, to a zero balance in that fund to, in 2 years, a over $500,000 balance. So we really have reestablished that fund. And just so you know, we're not trying to make a profit in that fund. We will be reinvesting all of it, but a little bit of that money this year in a couple of improvements, equipment improvements and those types of things. Our community service fund did okay. What's interesting about the community service fund is there was a change a couple years ago, which basically means that we take whatever balance prior year and use that to lower the levy for the next year. So that $22,526, once we figure out what our levy is for 23-24, or 22-23, sorry, we will then subtract that balance off. So we're targeting a zero for the following year. And the community service fund is kind of ramping back up. That includes, by the way, the pool, the Performing Arts Center, and the regular community education programming. It is ramping up a little bit from the pandemic and getting closer to normal. Our OPEB liability and employee trust fund has a nice size balance. We started this fund about 20 years ago to offset the liability that we account for, starting probably in about 2002, 2003, I think. Basically, this fund pays for our retiree benefits really after retirement. Okay, so it also includes a second component, which is our employee trust fund. That is where our employees are able to deposit their sick leave at when they leave at our discretion into the fund, associating that with post-employment benefits as well. So again, about a $5.6 million in there. We actually had an investment return of almost $14,000, which, if you interest rates this last year, is actually a pretty good accomplishment, and they were all very secure investments. Just so you get a feel historically for how that fund's been growing, that's intentional. The intent is actually, it's required that we add about 5% each year to that fund until it's fully funded. Otherwise, there are components. There's an incentive system designed from the state to do that. So we've been adding a little over $250,000 a year into that. What we do is we allocate a certain dollar amount in our budget, and then based on how we retire, which is difficult to anticipate, whatever is left over in that allocation is then put into the OPEB fund. Our liability that's remaining in that fund is $2.2 million. So we have about a $7.5 million liability, and we have over $5 million set aside for that. So we're actually in a pretty good position and continue to improve with that. So there you can see the amounts of that. From the DPI point of view, they do not distinguish between these two funds, but we do for tracking purposes. Obviously, those employee trust funds are set aside for, and there's a balance for each individual employee that we track. So a little bit of a decrease last year, more employees drawing on that trust than using it, than depositing into it. And then the OPEB fund was the additional $250,000. So that's kind of a gist of where the school finances are. From this last year, the main takeaways are, we did see a reduction in fund balance. It was anticipated, but it was a reduction, which is one of the first times that we've had that. Our other funds are in fairly good position, actually fairly strong position. Just our main fund is as we get into next, has some struggles. So as we get into this, just some reminders. Our preliminary budget is what is being talked about at this point in time. There will be changes. Those changes were related to information we receive in the next month. It is an opportunity for the electors at the annual meeting to give feedback to the board if they have any. The Board of Education actually approves the original budget, which is the budget we live on for the entire year, in October. And the levy is set in October as well. This year will be a little bit different because there is a referendum out there. And depending on the results of the referendum, we will have 2 tax levies that will be approved in our meeting in October. And then it will be determined based on whether the referendum passes or not, which levy is forwarded to our municipalities. So some projection information that we're considering when we're building this budget for this year. Enrollment is obviously estimated. We did have Third Friday about a week ago, and we are getting closer and closer to the school board. reducing. Even. Increase flat miscellaneous the state. It's always the revenue limit. Participating a 3-year Wisconsin are actually will there is and then or so. Um, I anticipate that we do not have this, just like you sign carryover. That is a nice thing, but at the start of the year, we were still over September 1st. We were still over $5 a gallon. Insurance is pretty level. Debt service is pretty level, actually dropping down because of what I talked about before with paying off some debt, and then other is pretty much level as well. All right. So then this is how we kind of spend those funds, not from a purpose point of view, but from a type point of view. It's called object. So you can see that salary is pretty level that from last year. There is a couple things happening in there. There are some new positions that we're using the federal dollars for, and that's offsetting some money that we spent as a stipend last year to help employees for not having a raise. Benefits slightly increasing. We did have a small increase in health insurance this last year. Services increasing. That's basically utilities and contracted transportation. Those two things that I just mentioned, basically both impacted by energy costs. Supplies are going up a touch. That's probably related to some curricular things that we're looking at out of the grant as well. Equipment is negligible. Debt services, insurances, and transfers are for the most part the same as they have been. Again, we'll kind of look at everything from a whole. From a budget perspective on top, we're looking at an operating budget of just under 64 million, an expenditure budget of 66.6. The difference is that 2.7 million. That is mostly associated with, oh boy, we had a little typo there on the deficit. Sorry about that. The carryover budget of $2.4 million, the deficit budget of 300,000, not deficient. I guess it could be deficient. And then non-referendum debt of 32,387. That's spending the remains of that Fund 38 balance. So to get us to that tie out number of 2.7 or $2.8 million. This is just a look at our referendum debt over the next 18 years or so, 16 years, I guess. You can see that the dollar amount is very pretty much the same, within a couple $1,000s on a year-to-year basis. But we do have money associated with being able to make that payment this next year. And we do have some additional funds that we're anticipating to put into this fund so that we can smooth out some debt service and save on some interest costs. If we have the referendum pass, this would be something that we reevaluate and perhaps not levy as much in this fund to provide some debt, to provide some relief to our taxpayers. Food service, as I mentioned before, had an increase, a significant increase this last year, attributed to basically having our parents participate at a high level. I will share with you that Sarah Tomaszewicz has said that that high level that we had last year seems to be holding pretty well. So that's awesome. Some of the improvements that we've made in food service are keeping our parents, our students coming to eat at our district, which is great. We were afraid when it wasn't free that we would lose some of that. But we did have an increase. And then there was some one-time funds that the federal government provided us this last year that weren't really anticipated or budgeted. Seamless summer option food service program. Again, also provided free meals to students, so not only during last school year, but also during the summer we were able to anticipate, be able to provide that. We connected that with our summer school program, and that was very successful. And then we have budgeted revenues to equal expenses this year of about $1.9 million for that fund. Capital projects, I mentioned this before. We actually, because interest earnings are starting to take off a little bit, we not only have the $800,000 at July 1st, but we anticipate over the year that we'll actually make a little bit more revenue in that fund, so we'll have $815,000, but we hope to spend that all or transfer it to our debt service fund if we don't have that expended by the end of the year. Employee trust funds, we're just required to say this, but kind of our interest earnings that are expected and what that's used for, and then actually it was the other side. I serve as the person that invests those funds. We just have to be upfront with that with our constituents. Community education, these are the 4 components actually. I forgot building security. We do provide, go around in our buildings on the weekends to make sure that everything's working well. Since we have a lot of community use of our buildings, we want to make sure that you know, everything's okay. So those are the 3 components. The main 2 are being pool community operations, and then the education, community education and outreach, and recreation. And then this is a very long paragraph that, again, the law requires us to share. It basically just talks about what the purpose of community education is, what we're trying to accomplish, and the purposes of the fund. So then we get into kind of the total tax levy calculation and what we'd be looking for this year. From an operational point of view, so that's those 3 funds that I talked about, Fund 10, 27, and 38, about $22.8 million. Our non-referendum fund debt, this will be our last year that we levy this unless we issue more debt at $339,000. And then our referendum approved debt of $9 million. Again, we're levying in order to help with our outstanding debt of over $100 million that's still out there, and then our community services amount, which is $614,000. Total debt, total levy of about $32.9 million. I would anticipate that if this levy was approved, I don't see that there would be a significant increase on average taxpayer impact for this levy. Here's our equalization value and our growth and our mill rate over time. You can kind of see that our assessed values have been increasing fairly significantly. That is very similar to what's happening in the state. Like I said, I think we'll be closer to the 14 to 15% range. I think from a statewide average, and the levies about $1 million more than last year. Mostly related to the debt service that we were talking about before. Again, just kind of showing you what, from a graphical presentation, what's going on with our levy rate. It seems to be going down quite a bit over the last 6-7 years here. And then also charting that equalization value, the property taxes, and the equalization rate on that chart on the bottom. Okay, all funds from a revenue perspective, about $72 million with each of the different components that we talked about. Again, some of those are related to property taxes, some of them aren't. I didn't mention community cooperative fund on the bottom. I'll do that. This is the expenditure side of it, very close to the revenue side, 72 million to 72.6. Cooperative is related to a federal grant that we work with actually several school districts in Wisconsin related to the vocational car programs grant. It is not taxpayer supported from a property tax point of view. It is a federal program that we administer for, like I said, several school districts in the state. This is my favorite sheet. Kind of shows on one page all the different funds that the school district has, what's going on with them in each area from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. It shows the transfer that we've mentioned several times. The laser doesn't work. $5.4 million going from the general fund to the special education fund, again, because so few of those expenses are reimbursed by the state of Wisconsin. It shows on the right side that we would spend all of those assigned funds plus the $300,000, so our fund balance would decrease by $2.7 million. Most likely, all those assigned funds will not be spent because all those strategic initiatives that the schools departments have will not be fully implemented, but some of them should be. So that number will decrease. And then we go into the non-referendum debt fund. You can see that it's showing a 0, first time in 20 years. Our debt service fund increasing slightly in order to basically pay off some debt out there and save some interest expenses and work with the mill rate a little bit. Our long-term capital improvement trust fund, we did create that a few years ago. It's only got $100 in it. That's a tool that we'll be able to use. Unfortunately, we can't spend any of the money we put in there till 5 years after the fund has been created, which is about 2 years ago. So that will be a tool that we'll use at some point in time, and that $100 basically just started the clock moving so that we can access the funds in it once we've been put some more money into it. Referendum bonds, we've talked about that. That's the money related to Forest Edge. Food service fund, we anticipate that being level this year. Employee trust fund, that's the trust component of those funds, the Fund 70s. We anticipate that maybe another $20,000 will be withdrawn from that, from employee trust accounts. OPEB fund increasing by $250,000, similar to what it did this year. The pool fund, and all these types of things, you'll see that when we add up the positives and negatives into that account, we anticipate it having a 0 balance at the end of the year because we had a $22,526 balance on July 1st, 2022. Again, that's just trying to get to that amount. It won't be perfect, but we'll work toward that. And then the Cooperative Purchases Fund, again, it's revenue in, revenue out. You'll see a 0 balance at the beginning of the year, a 0 balance at the end of the year, and that's just working with those other school districts. think that's it for me. I guess if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
As Andy mentioned, the board will take up this budget and make a motion at our October meeting, but we now have the floor open to the electors if any electors would like to ask any questions or make any comments about the budget. So I will bring you the microphone if anyone has any questions. Okay, hearing none.
Question, Andy, if the referendum passes, then the tax levy will be increased by $5,420,000.
For the first year, yes. Yep.
All right, any other questions?
I want to make a clarification. One of the options, I'm sorry, apologize for that. One of the options that the board would have would be to reduce service levy by $1.4 million from last year, or about $2 million from what I'm projecting here. Actually, closer to $3 million from what I'm projecting here.
So the net would be closer to $4 million?
Depending on how you look at the net. Right, a net from what would otherwise be passed would be closer to 2.4 million, because I'm otherwise we'll be at. Or if you did net from last year, yeah, then it would be closer to that $4 million number.
All right, any additional questions? All right, thank you, Andy.
You bet.
Okay, that will close the budget hearing for tonight. So now I will call to order the annual meeting of the Oregon School District. So the first order of business is to elect a chairperson. It is important to note that the chairperson is not to take part in any discussion unless he or she takes leave from the chair to do so. So I will open the floor to nominations for chair of the annual meeting. All right, there is a motion to nominate me to chair the meeting. Are there any other nominations? I'll say again, are there any other nominations? All right, for a third time, are there any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed. So there is a motion on the floor to nominate Krista Flanagan as chair of the annual meeting. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, say nay. All right, hearing none, I will chair the meeting from here on in. Next item on the agenda is the appointment of the parliamentarian. So as the chair, I will appoint Gina Jonan to serve as our parliamentarian for this meeting. Next item on the agenda is the adoption of the ground rules. The Oregon Board is proposing ground rules for tonight's meeting, and you can find the ground rules in the packet. So give people a chance to just look those over. And then I will entertain a motion to approve the ground rules. All right, we have a motion to approve the ground rules. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. I will ask for discussion from the floor. Does anyone have any discussion on the ground rules? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the ground rules, please say aye. Do we have any opposed? All right, motion carries. We do now have ground rules. All right, next on the agenda is the minutes of the last annual meeting. The minutes are in the packet for you to review. Because WASB does not recommend approval of last year's minutes, just because people that were here tonight not necessarily were here last year. So we do not have to approve those minutes. So those are just for your review. All right, now we will move on to the Superintendent's State of the District report. So I will introduce our Superintendent, Dr. Leslie Bergstrom.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Oh, it's on. Okay. I'm just used to the one in the gym where you hear yourself echo for 2 seconds after you're speaking. So welcome, everybody. I want to start with saying that other than today, where school has started with a lot of energy and excitement, today was energy and excitement, but in the direction of a broken water main, not in the direction that we like to see happen at the beginning of the school district or school year. But other than that, it has been an extraordinarily positive start. Something that we're all very excited about. You can feel the energy when we all came back together for our back to school assembly. It was pretty palpable. So all of that makes me very proud to be able to do an introduction for all of you tonight on the state of the district. And of course, there's really no way to even begin talking about the state of the district without first talking about our school board members. and really how much gratitude all of us have as administrators. Because for example, I just went to the state superintendent's conference, a one-day event at the Capitol. And boy, after you sit with a group of superintendents for a while, you come back and you're like, wow, I'm so grateful for my board. So we're very grateful for such a visionary, collaborative, and personable group of people who are all working together for the sake of our students. Thank you to every one of them. And so actually, everything we're saying tonight, I can proudly say is a part of the work that they have done. For example, we all know that public schools today are facing some challenges. And we'll talk about those challenges a little bit, but I also know that with the right people working on a challenge, and with support of the type of board that we have, and with just the sheer depth of talent within our district, I think a lot of those challenges become opportunities. And I'm going to talk about that just for a second, because if you look at the state budget and where we are at, and the prediction for the future related to state funding, it can get very concerning, right? It is a challenge. However, I think with the supportive community that we have, there's also the possibility of perhaps having the opportunity of getting slightly more local control over our budget through the potential passage of this referendum. So the budget's a challenge, but the referendum is an opportunity. Another challenge would be, and we've spoken about this quite a bit for those of you who are able to attend any of the referendum sessions, and that's the impact of the highly competitive market on our ability to retain and attract teachers. Now, up until this point, we have an excellent staff retention rate. We have an excellent ability to attract really high quality candidates to our school district, people that we're all very proud to work with. But we also know that we're facing a changing landscape related to that, and that we have to be proactive, because we can't just wait and let that competitive market come right at us. We have to be prepared for it. And then another one that's interesting, and you haven't really heard me talk about it before, but I think it's really important to put out there. There could potentially be a challenge connected, and it might also be an opportunity, to changing demographics. We all know that Dane County has an increased population. People are moving here. There are great things offered for young people who are looking to build a career. But interestingly, while Dane County is growing, there has been the biggest drop in birth rate that anybody who's worked with population and growth has seen. And we're just starting to see a little bit of that, because we rolled off a really high senior class and we brought in a slightly smaller kindergarten class. And it makes me wonder if this particular class is the first class that we are noticing the change in demographics. Of course, we'll be keeping an eye on that. And as I said, everything that is a challenge can also be thought of as an opportunity. So we all know our mission, and that grounds us, right? It makes us, all of us, collectively understand our common purpose, and that's a powerful thing in an organization. But what is really very powerful to us, that's our set of values. Now remember, this was a community-generated list of values that has guided us since 2015. And I would say that our commitment to our values has really provided us a roadmap for anything we've encountered. Everything from budget challenges to global pandemics. Our values have been what have helped us come through it feeling collaborative, cohesive, and stronger than we were before. And I think that they have served us well, and they continue to do so. And for those of you who aren't very familiar with them, they are very connected, right? When we talk about our whole child emphasis, you can't talk about our whole child emphasis without also thinking about how do we create relevant and empowering learning experiences to build the whole child, and to hold within that experience what it means to be educationally equitable. In addition to that, to also saying that our caring and professional educators are the people who make that happen, and how important they are to the success of our students. And then finally, strong family and community partnerships, which is what brought about the 5 values in the first place, right? And we see that played out with multiple organizations within our community, how important it is that we're all working together for a common purpose, beyond the school district into the community. And then, this is when it gets really exciting, because our school board has put together a strategic framework to help us think through the next 3 to 5 years and potentially beyond. And one of the things we knew as we were putting together this framework was we had a strong mission dating all the way back to 1989. We have our values, which have really grounded us and guided us through a lot of different scenarios. What is our vision? Now, we had a vision. It's policy 41102, really what we want our students to be able to do by the time they graduate, which was far beyond just earning credit. But we also knew it needed an opportunity to be updated with what our community thought was important today. So using the strategic framework that the board put together, we engaged with the community. We had meetings, we sent out surveys, we had engagement sessions, asking them, what are your hopes and dreams for our graduates? What do you really want for them? When they walk across the stage and they're shaking the hand of the board members, what is important to you that they are able to know and do? With the understanding that no 18-year-old is a finished product. None of us are either. We're all continuing to grow and evolve. But when we, as a system, are working collaboratively to cultivate what is a part of these 4 C's in Portrait of a Graduate, there is power in that. And we can use that, harness that power to create really excellent things for our students. So, what I'm hoping you will see, myself this evening, kicking it off in a very broad way, then on October 10th, our school leaders from 4K all the way to grade 6, they will talk to the school board about how Portrait of a Graduate plays out in their school, including their school goals, their measurements for success. And then on October 24th, you'll have our middle school and our high school do the exact same thing. So in reality, it's almost a 3-meeting presentation to our community about what we are accomplishing on behalf of our kids, with our kids, for our kids and families, what really is important to us, how we measure it, and how these 4 C's show up in our students' experiences. And if you'll notice, the very first leaf really is the foundational piece, and that's competency. So competency is getting proficiency in all of the standards that are a part of our academic experience. That's what competency is. It's everything that's in policy 41101. All of the credits that students need to be able to acquire through demonstration of their competency in order to graduate. That's part 1. That's what we mean by competency. And what's really fantastic about that is that we know that through what the learning experiences, the relevant and empowering learning experiences our teachers are creating, they are building competency that's measured through performances, through assessments, whether they're summative or formative, but we're measuring and we're working alongside the child, alongside the students, so they're understanding what skills they're building too. Another measurement of competency, of course, is the test that comes along once a year. So it can be forward, it can be what was the Aspire, and now will be the pre-ACT and the ACT. Those are 1 time a year tests. And they're important because they tell us a few really important things. But if you've been familiar with the work of our school board over the course of time, and you've read the position papers, then you would know that none of us in this district believe that a single test score is indicative of a student's potential or even what they've learned. We also don't think test scores are necessarily reflective of what we are offering or the quality of what we are offering our students. However, they are important. They help us determine big, broad things related to our school district, like how effective is the curriculum that we've been using in helping to teach particular concepts? Or if we're noticing a cohort over time is struggling with a particular concept, what do we do? How do we go back to that universal experience and make adjustments? So they serve a purpose, but they don't serve the most important purpose, and that is to help build the whole child and all of those pieces that are important to them as human beings and not just students. I also think it's important that we think about how we build competency and what we hold dear when we do it. And one of the things we have to always consider is how do we build competency in a way where we are thinking about equity in every step of the process. Are we ensuring that the materials we use to create the learning experiences are inclusive and representative? That students feel they're a part of what they are learning? All of those things that really, when you look at our values, it's all right there. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by being collaborative. We do it by being cohesive. We do it by using multiple measures and not just one measure to understand where our students are. But the other really important piece is we do that by holding high expectations for all of our students, not just high expectations for some of our students. We don't decide who can and who can't. We believe all can, all will. And we provide the supports that are necessary for that level of expectation. And our principals will go over competency to a great degree in the 2 presentations that you will see in October. Now, character and culture, that one's pretty darn fun too. So that includes some components such as how to identify an injustice and advocate for yourself or others, or how to employ strategies to support physical and emotional wellness. Those are things, not all, but those are some of the things under the character and culture section of Portrait of a Graduate. And you can see these pictures here. We see the art this is the three people who are standing here in the largest picture. That was taken at the Hispanic Heritage Month dinner and the art gallery presentation that our students put on, by the way. It was the students. And then the other picture down here at the bottom, you see our middle school principal, Mr. Avalos, delivering a birthday card to our students, which for a middle schooler, they were very perplexed. Why is my principal here to deliver a card? But guess what it does? And I love that he did this. It's a way to make a connection with that individual child, right? To say, I see you. And then up on the top, you see one of our teachers at Forest Edge, Mr. Orlowski, building teams within his classroom, building a team, I should say. So what we do with the creation of character and culture and cultivating that within our students, it's about being able to create cultures that people really care about one another, and they see one another, and they advocate for one another, and they have the skills to do it. It'd be great if we could just tell them to do it. Everybody be nice to each other. That would be wonderful. But if that worked, people would have been nice to each other thousands of years ago. That's not what works. What you have to do is you have to build the skills that students need to be able to work with one another in meaningful ways. We build skills. We build, example, emotional regulation skills so that students know how to handle themselves, how to feel upset within their body, but still be able to know what to do when they feel that emotion. That's important. That's what helps our kids get through the struggles when they're in that pit of learning, when everything's just slightly too difficult and they're really frustrated and they want to quit. When they can recognize their emotions within themselves and persevere through that feeling, that's where the best learning happens. And that's the type of thing that we help students learn to do within the Character and Culture Portrait of a Graduate. Critical and creative thinking, that's about, for example, these are more than just this. Analyzing and gathering credible information. Identifying and solving problems. Those are two of the examples. And you can see that right here. You have, this looks like STEAM class, because I think that's Mr. Fisher standing on the stairs, middle school STEAM class. Kids, they're transferring something from one container to another down the stairs. So that is about some critical and creative thinking, as it's the students down at the bottom who are in the Netherwood Arboretum learning about the water feature, and the students up at the top, that looks like it's probably Prairie View based on the brick, right? Looks like they're in the outside garden doing some plant measurements. So what we do with critical and creative thinking is we build it into the experiences that are a part of learning those academic standards and creating the classrooms and the cultures that we know to, the classroom culture we know to be so important. And honestly, this is already built into a lot of the academic standards because everybody, even the national level educators who are writing the standards, know how important it is to cultivate this within our students. Right? This is what's going to take them extraordinarily far when they are graduates and they are trying to find what their next step is. Being able to think critically and creatively is critical. And then our community. This is our boys cross country team after doing some community cleanup. Because the community portion of the 4 C's means this. Graduates display the skills and understandings necessary to learn from and contribute to local and global communities. This is an example of contributing to a local community. If our students can learn how to be good citizens by spending hopefully 13 years with us, then I think we will have done a very good job. Ecological literacy is a component of this, and I hope that our geothermal and our solar equipment in all of our schools contributes to that. The willingness to pursue internships, which is really important at the high school level, the pursuits of clubs and co-curriculars at all levels, they're all a part of helping students understand what it means to be a part of a community. And to do all of these magical things, it's really not magic, it's the hard work of our staff. It's the hard work and the continued pursuit of being better for the sake of our students. There's a lot of professional learning that happens in our school district, and that's exactly as it should be, because we should be better tomorrow than we are today. And our staff do it, and they do it all the time. And I feel very lucky to work with them, especially when we know there's a labor shortage and we know they've had 2 years in a row of no increases to their base pay. So, some of you have seen this slide before. If we want to continue to offer this high quality learning and service, we have to think about how to continue to retain and attract these educators as the landscape is changing. And we have to be able to offer competitive salaries. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what's next for the referendum, here's the information for you. I'm very proud to work here, and I hope all of you who are also in the OSD community feel the same way.
And that is our superintendent. That was a master class. I think she deserves a round of applause. That was amazing. Really well done about bringing our portrait of graduate to life. Thank you for doing that, Leslie. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next parts of our agenda here. 7, old business. We don't have any, so we are going to move to new business, which is the resolutions. So first is we need to adopt our tax levy. So may I have a motion, which is on your motion sheet. It's number 8A. Well done, Anna. All right, there we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. I will entertain any comments or discussion from the floor. I'm sorry. The second was Heather. All right, any comments or discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We have now adopted the tax levy. So next on the agenda is Resolution B, which is adoption of school board salaries for 2022-2023, and you have that motion in front of you, so I will entertain a motion to approve that. All right, we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Sorry, can you state your name? Great. Thank you. So Katie can have that for the minutes. Okay. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? And we will make note that school board members, I will abstain from that motion, and so I want to, Heather, Mary, Troy, Anna, Tim. All right, so all the board members have abstained from that motion. Okay, are there any other motions from the floor? All right, we have an additional motion from the floor. Is there a second on that motion? All right, is there any discussion? Katie, do you have that motion for the record? Okay, hearing no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? As a board member, I will abstain from that motion. I see here nods from the rest of the board members will abstain from that motion and vote as well. Okay, moving on. C, set date and hour for the 2023 annual meeting. The district recommends that the fourth Monday in September for 2023 at 6:30 p.m. and that would be September 25th. So is there a motion from the floor?
I'll move to set the date to September 25th.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second that the annual meeting for 2023 will be September 25th, 2023. Any further discussion on that motion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. That takes us through the motions for the annual meeting this year. So, last motion is a motion to adjourn. All right, is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned at 7:35. Thank you so much for attending.